everybody, it is Romania Black, and we're on episode 11 of Frieren Beyond Journey's End. And the last two episodes were pretty epic, I'm not gonna lie. I was in love with them. There really was. I've been reading everybody's comments, and I so agree. The animation, the fighting, the emotion, the flashbacks, the callbacks, the history with Flom, and the funny thing is, there's still so much mystery. There's still so much we don't know that I'm so excited to see how the show can possibly call back and tie back to Flom, tie back to her and Frieren's moments. It's really great. I'm super excited about that. But I've got some comments I want to talk about and some things, but it hit me in the Discord right before coming to this video that we were talking about Himmel and Frieren's relationship. And it's basically, you know that movie Pixar's movie Up, where it's the old man and his wife dies and he decides to go on this journey. Yeah, this is kind of the reverse of that, where the old man dies and the adventurer wife is actually immortal and gets to go do the thing she wanted to do. That's kind of what this is. And every time, I think that's what's selling me on their ship at this point. I'm like, it's like the ship from Up. If you can ship them there and the memory of that spouse driving the other to pursue their future, then sure, we'll go with that. But man, so, Frieren is also a stone cold badass and a smut reading grandma, and she's just got to get these kids to the northern land so they can go talk to a ghost. That's essentially the plot of this story. But she was just absolutely ice cold, just making Aura kill herself, and there we go. I'm presuming we're about to pick up where that left off, but I'm hoping Stark and Fern got some time to sleep and rest up, because both of them were kind of put through the ringer by Lugner and Linley, and then Drop was killed by Frieren pretty single-handedly, so, or barely with a finger move, so there's that. But let's talk about these comments real quick before we start. Alessi Colley was talking about in episode 9, there was a callback to episode 2, where in episode 2, it was known that Fern is really hard to detect. And that was called back in episode 9 when Lugner couldn't detect Fern. I was like, I like that. I like that callback. That's really fun. It's great. Jerome brought this up. Now, these next two comments, I want to say first and foremost to you all, I don't play RPGs. I don't play Dungeons and Dragons. I know of Dungeons and Dragons. I have friends and family that play RPGs and have played Dungeons and Dragons, but I have not. So I know a little bit of the lingo, but I am not the reactor watching this show that knows all about mages and about power scaling and about powers and how these all things work. I don't know that shit. I'm just coming at this show because it has great storytelling, amazing characters and animation, and it's really fun and entertaining to watch. That's where I'm coming from. So my base knowledge on a lot of things that people watching this show know in terms of that are probably going to be, there's going to be a gap. So Jerome talked about how Qual was a sage of corruption, which they did say that in the episode, and Aura was a sage of destruction and was one of the 7 sages of destruction. So that is a good thing to note. It seems like Qual was maybe a sage of corruption, and that sage was maybe under a different demon king of a different time period, and that demon king's like whole banner was like corruption, and that was that whole saga. Like they're like, oh, I'm the dynasty of corruption, and I'm the demon king of corruption, and you, Qual, are one of my sages. Seems like that was the case. Whereas Aura, the demon king of destruction, had 7 sages. Aura is one of them, and now they've destroyed that, so technically there's 6 left. And we know the Demon King of Destruction was destroyed. That's where the story started. My question is there a new Demon King that has filled in the power vacuum left by the old one? I don't know. I don't want to know. We'll find out as we go. So don't answer that question and spoil me. And the moderators have been really, really good about saying, do not read these people's comments. I'm assuming because they're trying to spoil me. So there we go. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I know that they killed the one Demon King that Aura worked under, but what I don't know is there a new Demon King trying to surface? Is there a new Demon King that has risen up through the ranks and is trying to gather everybody together? Or are they still just all running around the remnants of the Demon King's army? Although it's been 80 years, you think they would have done something in 80 years, and they haven't just been sitting on their hands. I mean, Aura took 30 years to... after Himmel died, then she kind of started to get back into the game. So I'm curious about that. If somebody's going to try to fill that power vacuum, what that's going to be like. So we'll see. And then the other thing with that was Algumalgium was talking about how Fern and Frieren, when they fired Zoltrak, it was white, but Zoltrak using it was black. And they were like, well, that could be a sign that the spell was altered and foreshadowing to it. And I was like, yeah, it could, but all of their attacks are white. Like every attack Frieren and Fern have used so far have been blasts of white energy. So I kind of just thought that's just how they use their magic. It's just white energy. No matter what spell they use, it's going to look the same. We haven't seen anything to suggest otherwise, so I don't know yet. So who knows? That's a nice headcanon, but I don't know if it tracks with the logic of the story or not. But they did note in some RPGs, weapons and spells are modified. I don't know anything about that, so that's good to know. And finally, KA talked about Aura's VA. Their voice actress is actually Yanli in the Japanese adaptation of Modazushi, which I've watched and it's amazing. And then has also plays Spooky Boogie in Psycho-Pass, which I love Psycho-Pass, so that's really cool to note. Also, Aura's voice actress is married to Yuki Kaji, who is Eren Yeager's voice actor, who is Mei Naramiya's voice actor, who voice acts a lot of different characters. Good for her. Good for her to be married for Yuki Kaji. Good for you. Good for you, Yuki Kaji, to be married to her. So, yeah, I thought that was really, really cool. So, thank you all so much for the comments and for dealing with this noob not knowing anything about RPGs or, like, fantasy magic lore. I feel like when I started to read Modazushi and different Danmai and Chinese fantasy, a lot of the fandom were like, here's some Chinese fantasy tropes. And I was like, okay, cool. As long as it's not spoiling things to come or spoiling things I'm going to learn about characters, I'm fine knowing that because it's cool. But I mean, the people in the Danmai community are super kind and super helpful. And they're like, hi, Westerner, let me introduce you to our culture. And I was like, hello, yes, I would love to know these things. So... But yeah, I'm super excited. I'm really excited to dive into this episode and see. We're at episode 11, which is not quite the midway point of the season, but we've technically finished a quest, so we have 6 Sages of Destruction left to go. Do I think we're getting to all of them in this season? I don't know. That does beg the question now if the little imp, the Elven character in the OP is a sage. Could very well be. We'll just have to see. So we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to dive right into episode 11 of Frieren, Beyond Journey's End. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And let's check our subtitles. They're on and let's go. Ah, my man Koyasu. You know what? Koyasu, he's not here for a long time, but he's always here for a good time. Oh my god, I can't believe he got to voice a character in this series! Oh! So if you don't know who Koyasu is, he's a Japanese voice actor. He plays Kraft in this episode. I won't say who all he plays in other series because that might be spoilery, but let's just say anytime he is involved in a series, he just always plays such a fun character. And he's most known as Dio in JoJo's. I don't think that that's like much of a spoiler. He plays Dio in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I haven't even watched JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and I know the Dio memes, I know the voice, everything, but he's been in Neon Genesis, he's been in other series as well, Attack on Titan. His characters are just always, they're never here a long time, but they're always such great characters, and they're always end up being like some of my favorite characters from those series, so... What can we do? But man, I'm so happy he was here. But I'm so sad that we only get Kraft for one damn episode. Frieren. Frieren giveth and Frieren taketh away. Which it is what it is. I'm so curious about this episode. There's definitely stuff to talk about. We're on our way to the Northern Lands, as it were, to go find heaven. Everybody's kind of like, I like that, you know, the count is like, this seems like a very treacherous journey. You sure you want to go do that? I'm not going to stop you. It just seems like a big gamble to go up there while there's all this inner turmoil going on. But you seem like a strong mage. And Frieren's got to go take an SAT exam to be certified in the Magic Union. You know, we're going to talk about that. But Kraft didn't really seem like it was a big deal that they were traveling up north. He was like, okay, cool. Good for you all. And that's just it. He's just like, I hope you get there. Hope you have fun. It's good that you go. When you get closure with your dead boyfriend, you know, in a couple centuries, if you want to hook up, I'm here. I'm like, Frieren, oh, my girl. And my thing is, I do ship Frieren and Himmel. They are a love to last a lifetime. They are love beyond ages. They are all this good stuff. But the romantic in me is all about that. And I love Himmel and Frieren's relationship. But the romantic in me is also like, girl, after you're done talking to him at the Vale or whatever, he would probably no, he would not be okay with her moving on. No, his ghost would be like, don't you dare love anybody else but me, damn it. But I kind of want Frieren to end up happy. Although, you know what? I get it. If Frieren, if Himmel was it, if she's demisexual and Himmel was the only one for her and now he's gone and she's just going to collect shrooms for the rest of her days and that's what she's okay with, go for it. But I'm like, girl, if you ever get an inkling to maybe go hang out with this hot monk elf, you could do that too. Although I think Kraft reminds her too much of Hader, who she was just like, ugh, corrupt priest. I feel like he reminds her too much of that she'd be like, nah, not for me. But I'm like, dude, also, he made it sound like he was way older than her. And I was like, oh my God. So, okay. They weren't kidding when they said these elves don't really get it on, nor do they have any inkling to. Because I was like, all right. We're going to talk about this episode because I really like this episode. This episode was great. It reminded me a lot of, if you've ever been watching sports anime before, you have the matches, you have the exciting games. It's like all adrenaline. It's high adrenaline. It's a lot of fun. It's like where a lot of the action goes down at. But honestly, my favorite moments of sports anime are the episodes in between the games. Because that's where you get character development. It's where you find a lot of like humorous situations with the characters. It's where you can kind of delve deeper into the thematic elements of the story outside of the battles themselves. That's my jam. So this episode was my jam. I was like, yes, give me more of this humor. Give me more of these fun characters. If all the characters in the OP are just random characters that we're going to meet for one episode, I'm fine with that. If they're as good as this episode, I'll take it. But interestingly enough, Frieren, for all of her kind of seeming like she was not going along with the religious aspect of the monk, for whatever reason, Fern finds her praying over the soldiers. And to me, it feels like Frieren does have a spiritual side to her, but she's not one that flaunts it, and is not one to explain it. And I respect that. Because I kind of am the same way. So I totally get that. But I feel like she's, asking for the souls of these soldiers who were controlled by Aura to rest in peace. But then she herself doesn't exactly, she's a little bit agnostic herself, right? So I like that opening. I like how she just is bluntly like, you're late, Fern. I was like, Frieren, let's be real. You did not want Fern on that battlefield facing Aura. Let's be real. And so, yeah, they defeated Aura. There we go. Let's skip this intro and get into this. So I like that the Count lived. I'm super happy he lived. I'm glad he got to have closure with his grandfather and that he's never going to forget Frieren for all that she's done for them. I'm glad for that. It's probably a good thing that at this point in the story, Frieren is able to do all these deeds and be remembered by these people. And it's not something that, 1,000 years ago, she was trying to be incognito and didn't want to be seen by anybody. Now she's like, well, hell, I'm strong enough. At least if they spread stories around about me, then maybe it'll keep the demons away. Who knows? But I really like that scene where they're on the battlefield and they gather up all the soldiers and they're going to treat them with respect and all that. So I like that Stark, like I said, Stark is this cool mixture between, to me, Ison and Himmel, because there's parts of Stark, like when he tells Frieren that he'd be mad too, there's parts of him that seem a lot like Himmel, and some of his, like, the comedy surrounding Stark feels like Himmel, right? But then you have Ison, who he also is comparable to, and then you have Fern, who's comparable to Hader, and also comparable to Frieren. So, look, you have two ships. You have Hader and Ison, and you have Frieren and Himmel, and Stark and Fern are kind of combinations of those two ships, so it works out anyway, right? And I had some comments that were basically saying that, like, I do think that Stark likes Fern. I do think so. And I think he's aware that he likes Fern. But he also realizes that Fern is kind of a tsundere, and he's like, But he does things like when he helps her on the roof and stuff. He's a gentleman, and he helps her, and he likes her. Fern is just kind of cold, but I think she does like Stark. She's just being very cold about it, and she doesn't want to acknowledge it. And because at one point, whenever he's like telling her she smells nice, she's like, ew, no, compliments, blah. And my best friend is exactly like that. My best friend is like, I do not want you complimenting me. Like leave me alone. No. But that's just how she is. Doesn't mean she likes you or not. She's just not into that. So I don't know. I feel like these poor two kids, they're both somewhat oblivious, but they both somewhat know that they like each other. And Frieren is no help because Frieren's like the last person you want to go to for dating advice. She's like, well, my beloved, I ignored until they died. And then I realized I should have been I should have been playing off of that. And they're like, oh, we don't want to talk to you about relationship advice. Not for an elf. Don't go to an elf for relationship advice. And so I do like this part here where Frieren thinks of what Aura said to her about Himmel, and then Frieren smiles and goes, this is a normal reaction. Meaning that she's like, oh, me killing her and getting revenge on her for what she said about my man, it's totally normal. Don't mess with Granny Frieren and her dead boyfriends and her smut novels. You will end up in the ground 6 feet under. And I like that she says, good job defeating Lugner and his henchwoman. Frieren's like, I'm not even going to recognize her with a name. Frieren, you old soul. You old soul indeed. I'm glad that they got healed up because they were in pretty bad shape, right? And he's like, this is normal for a warrior to be beaten up. And Fern's like, really? You're covered in wounds. I love it. So then, yeah, we go back to the city and they give her the passed down through the generations. I like the idea that the fake grimoires are something that's been passed down through the generations by their family. And Frieren's like, God, another fake. I'm looking for that first edition smut, old man. This is all you got for me. So I like, though, that Frieren kind of sees through this because it supposedly has these barrier spells. It's kind of a nice security feature, and I'm wondering if Flom intentionally put these fake grimoires all around the city because I feel like it was for Flom a way to mask how strong she actually was because she planted all these fake grimoires. So a demon coming after the grimoire would believe the barrier protecting the city is from this book and the spells learned within these books. But that's not the case at all. They're just like, no, the spell's actually stronger than the one in this book. We've just kind of been playing it off like it was the end all be all these years, but we know it's not. So that's really interesting. It almost seems like a way for Flom to kind of cover her tracks and how strong she is by saying, oh, I was only able to do these amazing things through these detailed grimoires that I created. When in reality, they're all just fake. And it was just her magic that was that strong doing it from the start. I don't know. It just seems like something interesting in that regard. I do like the design on the grimoire with the knots. That's really, really cool. I also like that Frieren is just really, really like formal and blunt. And he's like, oh, he's like, why are you so formal? And we find out that this was the city where Himmel basically, she's like, Hader said that in the royal capital, the disrespecting nobility is punishable by death. And Frieren's like, yeah, Himmel and Eisen were nearly executed for speaking casually to the king. And I like that we go back to that flashback that we saw back in episode 1. We realize this was the kingdom where that happened. And Frieren's like, yeah, Himmel was screaming and crying. It takes me back. And I like that when we look here, they're about to execute Himmel and Hader, or Himmel and Eisen. And Eisen's just sitting there like, and Himmel's just sobbing. Like, I would imagine Stark would be doing the same thing. And Hader's like, no, don't kill him. And I like that Frieren's like, no. It's like the one time we see Frieren like in a panic, like, don't kill him. So interestingly enough, I thought that they left from this city to go on their quest, but that wasn't necessarily the case. Or maybe it was that this was the city that they left from. But the point of it is that they were all together when this happened. So that's interesting that this wasn't the starting point. This was just a point in their journey. I like that as we go, we are getting more and more of the context of the hero's journey kind of filled in the gaps. Whereas in episode 1, we only got like a small piece of it. Here we're getting more. And that whole executioner scene with the tree chopping and Stark's reaction and just him getting smaller and smaller on the screen, hilarious. And I love he's like, oh, these central lands, sure, barbaric, my lord. he's like, I'm just a country bumpkin raised in a ditch. I don't know protocol. He's like, don't, I'm just a simple farmer's boy. Don't hold it against me. That was hilarious. The humor in this episode was so perfect. I absolutely loved it. And I love how it's played off so funny, but it's so still no nonchalant. It's great. And so Stark just passed out. I like that they just carry him through the town. They just carry him through the town. He looks like a Macy's Day Parade float, and they're just carrying him. He's just like passed out. So funny. And it's not drawn attention to with like big gags or sight gags or anything. It just, the humor happens and it's great. And so the funny thing is they talk about them going through the parade and being touted as heroes. And Frieren's like, we can afford that now, I guess. Also, I love everybody in the town is like, they're all hanging on Stark, praising him. And he's like, oh, who, me? These burgers that Fern and Frieren are both eating are massive. They make Maji Burger from Kuroko's Basketball look like a joke. Like that is some damn big burgers. I'm envious of them. That's like a pounder, not even a quarter pounder. That's like a full pound. And I like that we get this little song. It's very beautiful as they're repairing the city. I love this shot of the priest healing Stark's wounds. So by all accounts, if this priest was healing Stark, then Hader was probably in the party because he could heal people, right? That seems like a thing. Because I thought at the beginning, I always think of like the white mage as the healer in fantasy stories, because my brother and I joke about Dragon Ball Z Abridged, and it's like, nobody F's with the white mage. And in Dragon Ball Z Abridged, Dende is the white mage and heals people. So that's what I thought going into this, that Frieren and Fern were going to be healers, but they're really not. They're just like magicians. They just use magic as offense. Whereas Hader seems like as a priest, he would have the defensive magic spells. I'm wondering if Kraft had that as well, and he was just buff-ass to like protect himself if need be. Interesting. I love that shot though. That's great. And then the one guy with the axe at the very end. I like that as they're getting their winter clothes given to them, Frieren is like picking out the smut she's going to take on her journey. She's at the bookshelf being like, oh my God, this person wrote True Blood. Put that in the pile. Like she's just getting everything ready. I love that she doesn't care about the winter clothes. She's like, I'm fine. It's really cute though that Stark has like all the little kids around him, carrying them on his back and his shoulders. It reminds me a lot of Hader opening up the orphanage for the little kids and all the little kids hanging around Himmel. Again, Stark is Himmel coated. There's some Himmel coating with Stark and you cannot deny it, even though he has a lot of icing coating as well. And then Fern is Frieren and Hader coated. So there you go. I also like that you see Fern feeding Frieren and like wiping her mouth, and the cats are also running off with the food as well. I just imagine like, come on, Grandma, eat your porridge. Frieren is such a diva sometimes. She's like, I don't know if I can eat it. And Fern's like, would you want me to feed you? Yeah. She's ridiculous. But then, yeah, they look out at the night sky and they're like, we are about to leave this to go on a quest in the snow and it's gonna suck. So yeah, they're seen off and the Count's like, look, I don't know how to tell you this, but the things are pretty bad up north. The travel's kind of, it's cut off, so I don't know what you guys are planning on doing. He says the northern travel is restricted. So how did Kraft get through? Even adventures must be accompanied by a first-class mage. So that's interesting. The thing about it was, Kraft was by themselves. They did not have a first-class mage, but they were coming back from the mountains. So maybe to go up north to Ende, you have to have a mage, but coming back, they don't care because you're leaving. Interesting. Okay. We'll just let that slide for now. I thought it was weird that Kraft was by themselves, but then again, Frieren traveled by herself for how long? So that's interesting, but Kraft isn't a mage, so curious and curiouser. So then they talk about certification of being a first-class mage. The Continental Magic Association. I was like, are you kidding? You have to have certification. And Frieren's like that veterinarian that has been practicing for years. And she's let her license expire. And she's like, I know how to save a horse. Why do I have to go take another test? I love that there's this legality to it. It's kind of hilarious, but we get confirmation that that's what Fern was doing in the city, was getting confirmed. And Frieren's like, oh, do I really have to do that? And she brings out this charm with the same kind of symbol to it. And she's like, this emblem doesn't work anymore. And they're like, oh, that's an antique. That's a relic. It doesn't. And she's like, ugh. She's like, it's a hassle when they change their standards of conduct so frequently. I love that Frieren just hates the idea that over time systems change. Like, you have different systems of citation and papers. You do APA, you do MLA, you do Chicago Manual. She's like, why do I have to learn these new certifications? Why can't I just use the one I've got? I feel you, girl. And they're like, where you can take the first class exam is the city Oberst, a largest magical city in the northern lands. But they explain on the map that it's like where they are now, there's a mountain that they have to pass, which is where we end up in this episode. Next up, there's a forest. So I'm assuming next episode we'll probably hit up that forest. And then we have another castle, and then we hit Oberst. So we've got probably a couple episodes before we get to the biggest city in the northern lands and go from there. It's going to be a long journey. And they're like, we're not going to forget what you did for us. Have fun. Good travels. And then they end up lost in the bitter winters. And I like that they say that in a war against the Demon King's forces, the most lives were claimed by the winter. Which makes sense. If you don't know where you're going, you'll just freeze to death. And poor Stark, this poor southern country bumpkin, he doesn't understand like how brutal the winters are. And I like that he's the one that's like, nope, passing out, can't handle it. Which obviously the mages, they probably can use some of their mana to keep the cold at bay, but Stark's not a mage, so he's not able to do that, right? I'm glad they find the house. Also, because Frieren, I think this proves one thing, because Fern notes that the man inside is a pervert and doesn't want to stay there. Frieren sees no problem in this. Frieren's like, what? He's just a shirtless guy. It's fine. I like it's kind of the opposite, where usually the old ladies are like, oh my gosh, no, get him away. He's not clothed. And the kids are like, it's fine. But here Fern is kind of the old-fashioned conservative, where she's like, oh no, I don't want to see this shirtless man. And Frieren's like, why? What does it matter? I love Kraft. I freaking love him. I love that he's doing squats and stuff to keep himself buff and to keep himself warm. He's so handsome. I'm like, Frieren, girl, what? You just letting this guy go? Come on. Like, he seems like he's great. And Frieren's like, all right, let's go in and intrude. And he's like, oh, you're an elf, aren't you? She's like, yep. And he's like, come inside. I like that Frieren not only invites herself inside, she like bypasses everything and makes room at that fire. And she's like, okay, I'm warm now. Okay, cool. It's great. Meanwhile, Fern is the one she's concerned over there for Stark. And she's like, and Kraft says, I thought the elves had died out. I haven't seen one in 300 years. So they've not met each other. They don't know who each other is. And I like that he asks her later on, he says, well, what have you been doing? And she's like, oh, I was in the Party of the Heroes. And he's like, yeah, that was like 80 years ago. What have you been doing before then? For like 1,000 years. And she's like, what have you been doing? I wish we could have found out more about him. I wish we could have found out about him being a monk. What's that about? Like, where'd he come from? And does he know the elves are nearly extinct? He thinks that they are. So, interesting. Like, I'm curious. And he's like, oh, thanks for the fire, miss. He's like, the goddess must have led you here. He very much has that kind of like, I believe in these things. He has the goddess relic there and the statues. He's like, I crossed the mountain, but the blizzard extinguished my coals. And I was keeping myself alive by doing squats inside this freezing hut. He's like, I didn't really need a lot of food. And then you guys showed up. She's like, I'm not sure I understand. He's like, I'm Kraft the monk. And she's like, Frieren the mage. And then poor Stark. He's like, oh, you're traveling to heaven, huh? You can kind of see the lines around his eyes. Thank you for being so, good on you for being so pious. And Frieren's like, I'm not totally sure I believe it. I find it interesting that Frieren is a bit agnostic, but I kind of see where she's coming from, where she's been around kind of so long and she's never really seen the goddess in action that she starts to doubt that they exist. But Kraft says that he's had experiences that have proven that she does. And so it's like this act of faith. And Frieren, it's interesting to see how Frieren doesn't really seem to have faith in anything supernatural, spiritual. I'm sure that's going to be something that's going to come up and go along the way and come back and be something that she touches back upon. So then poor Stark being cold. I love that. Here's the thing. I love that Stark's vision, what he fantasizes about, our sweet summer lamb, is that damn jumbo berry special. That's what he's after. You can say it's an innuendo for something, but it's just the damn ice cream. I love Ison's like giving him the thumbs up in the back, like, go for it. Y'all believe whatever you want, but I tell you what, when this was happening, I was like, okay, Stark is going to wake up, and either, I was like, a couple things are going to happen. Either he's going to wake up by the fire and they will have like put a bunch of blankets or something on him, or if you've watched Berserk and read that series, then there's a female character that he wakes up next to, and the female character has to warm his body because, it's a woman's job to warm his body up, or so the main character of Berserk's is told in that moment. But what I was hoping for was that this series has done a really good job of subverting expectations and subverting the tropes that we're used to. And I was like, wouldn't it be funny? Because Kraft is an elf who does not seem to have much modesty involved with, just being naked around people. I'm like, it would be hilarious if Kraft was the one sitting next to him, warming up his body, because Fern ain't gonna do it, and Frieren's like, no. So I feel like Frieren was like, why don't you do it? And he'd be like, okay. And so that was the best moment where he wakes up and it's next to him, and there isn't anything sexual about it at all. No, it's not treated as a moment where he's just like, I like that it's, Stark's not like, he's not just like, oh no, a man warming up my body. It's not treated as anything sexual. He's just like, who are you? I was like, yes, it's someone he doesn't know. And he's just like, it's this rando stranger. What are you doing? And he's like, well, hello, sir. I'm just trying to help warm your body. He's like, who is this guy? He's like, there's no way to thank someone for warming up your body. And then I like these, like, you've got a nice body, old man. And I was like, yes, damn straight he does. And of course, Stark has to be like, not like that. Because they're like, Mr. Stark. I like that Fern is the one to say Mr. Stark. Like, for a hot second, Fern opens up her eyes and she's like, wait a minute. I like that Fern has to be the one to confirm. And she's saying, wait, do we have a chance or not? And Stark's like, no. He's like, I'm not into the old man elf. He's like, I like that Stark is secure enough in his sexuality to say, I can appreciate a man's body for being chiseled. Thank you very much. It's amazing. It's like, I'm not attracted to women at all. I'm not attracted to women. But I will be the first to say if a woman has a beautiful body, I'm like, no, you can appreciate the aesthetic without being attracted to it. And I'm like Stark being like, no worries, Fern. We're still good to go. I'm just appreciating the work that this man has done to tone his abs. I'm just saying. I'm like, Stark, thank you. Thank you for being a positive role model for sexuality everywhere. He's got a nice, and the fluidity of the animation where he puts on the jacket and then the scarf, I was like, oh my God, show. Rewind that, back it up, and just replay it, please. He's got a nice body from training hard. Yeah, he's not just a monk for nothing. Yeah, yes, please. He must be really strong. And that's probably why he's been able to travel by himself. He's not a mage, so he's freaking strong so he can handle things. He's like, what's your name? And he's like, oh, hey, I'm Kraft the monk, and these sweet-ass threads that I'm wearing, like, his drip is amazing. He just has it all going on. I'm digging the monk. Yes. He's like, you must be a famous monk, right? And he kind of stops there and says, he just says to rest here. Yeah, so that's interesting. So I've had White Raccoon just sitting here doing nothing, and I didn't know if I would need White Raccoon or not. But you have Kraft and you have Frieren, who are both these elves with amazing powers, but they are not known. I kind of like that because it's a nice subversion from like the elves that we see in Lord of the Rings. Like in Lord of the Rings, the elves are pretty much like, yes, we're amazing. What else do you want? like the elves are not shy in Lord of the Rings about putting up what they've done and how great they are. But in this story, the elves are extremely humble and they're not saying a damn word because they don't want people to know about their existence because they're targets. Because I think the elves know at the end of the day that yes, they will naturally live longer lives than practically anything on that planet, but they are just as susceptible to dying as any other creature. So I feel like he's like, he doesn't acknowledge like if he's famous or not, because he's like, no, I've been trying to hide out from this whole time. Interestingly enough. So yeah, they help him get the food stuff, the food supplies into the cottage, and he's like, yeah. And then he asks what she's been doing before then. And he's like, well, we're elves. So what else have you been doing? And she doesn't answer that question. There's so much like unspoken tension and just like awkward silence between them. And it really does make sense what she said, where they don't really have a romantic bone in their body. And I'm like, oh, I wish y'all did. Although Himmel's ghost would be very mad. So the scenes where they're praying over the food, in the first scene we have, it shows that Stark is eating, Frieren is eating, and then Fern and Kraft are praying over the food. And then it shows them all sleeping there. Poor Fern needing her blanket. Frieren took it from her. Aw. So you see Frieren has her books there, waiting for winter to pass. Then it shows like Frieren reading her smut, letting Fern peek over her shoulder, and Stark is training with Kraft on top of him, which is really fun. And then Kraft is telling Fern about the monks, about the goddess. And I kind of like that Fern has this little like smile on her face, because it's probably the first time since Hader's passed that she's been able to talk to somebody that seems like a kindred soul. So that's really sweet, at least as far as religion goes. And I like that Frieren's just in the background like, I don't believe this nonsense, but whatever. You guys can if you want. And then we see like the representation of them burrowing the hole with the squirrels. And we see the nuts and berries that are gathered. We cut back to them eating again. This time, Stark joins them in praying over the meal, but Frieren does not yet. She's not quite there. And then we have the training with Stark and Kraft some more. And then this time back at the cottage, she's you can tell Frieren is just like holding it in, just getting it done as soon as she can. But she does pray over the meal, which is nice, that effect that Kraft has on them. Mm-hmm. So then spring starts to come. It's been 6 months since they've been in hiding in the winter. And he's like, we made it through the long winter in the northern lands. So, and then he carves the little, the necklace, and he asks her to give it to Fern, because she was raised by a priest. She's pretty pious. And then Frieren's like, so why do you believe? And he's like, excluding during the age of mythology, the goddess creation hasn't shown herself once in the long history of this world. She's like, why do you believe in her? And he's like, well, when I was young like you. And I'm like, oh shit, if Frieren being 1,000 years old is young to him, how long's he been around? And he's like, now I believe in her from the bottom of my heart. But he doesn't explain why. He doesn't explain what was the moment that made him believe. Like, he doesn't explain that. He just says that now he does believe. And Frieren's just kind of like, And he's like, no, I need her to exist. And we see the carcass of the animal that the fox is eating on. So I like this concept of faith and praise, and kind of this idea of legacy that goes along with it, because he's like, I've lived so long that I need something. I need something to kind of believe in, to give praise to keep me going into these years where everyone around me is gone that I knew. And so for Frieren, she kind of thinks back to Hader and him praising her for all that she's done. and I like the idea that Hader praising her is a way to keep her legacy alive, even if it's through one person. And she's like, nah, I already had somebody do that for me, so I don't need you to do it too, but thanks for offering. But I love that concept too, right? He's like, when I die, I'll go to heaven and she will praise me and say, well done. You've lived a fantastic life. And he's like, it's too cruel for the path your life took to not be remembered by anyone. And I love this concept that Kraft is relying on his faith that he'll be praised when he dies. And Frieren's like, yeah, but I've already been praised by someone. So I've already been remembered by somebody. So that's all that matters. So I don't need to praise to her, but I get why you're doing it. It's so good, right? I love it. I love it. So yeah, let me go back to this. So yeah, my program has died. No. So yeah, this was so sweet. I loved this episode. The episode's crashed, so I can't go back through it right now. I'm going to try to load it back up. But in any case, I thought this was a really good episode. I really, really enjoyed it. And then they're going on their way to heaven, going on their way to see. I wish Kraft would have came with them. I wish he would have came. I do like the idea that there are more elves around. We know there's that elf in the OP that's still around too, so But I don't know. I don't know what else we're going to get out of it, but I'm so sad that Kraft is gone. I was like, come on. I wanted him to join the crew, but that doesn't look like it's happening, which is so sad. And he's like, oh, I'll see you in a couple centuries. And she kind of tells him that she's like, yeah, there's someone that I loved, but he's passed now. And he's like, oh, okay. He's like, well, maybe I'll see you in a few centuries and you'll be ready to move on and get with somebody else. I'm rooting for you, Kraft. I'm rooting for you because I want Frieren to always love Himmel and for him always to be in her heart, but I don't want her to deny herself from being happy because of a ghost. But if she's happy being just with that ghost, that's fine. That's all good, right? I want to go back to this episode. It just reloaded and I want to get it back in here and see if we have anything else here to talk about. But yeah, we have the orphanage that she talks about and seeing Himmel with all the kids, right? And Hader's there too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I did like when she said that she was like, oh, one day, what does he say there? He's like, someday I might raise an apprentice for you. And she's like, I thought you had to marry for that. And I was just like, oh, girl. I like that Hader basically says, she's like, well, I thought you couldn't marry because you're a priest. And he's like, just because I can't marry doesn't mean I can't get it on with somebody. Although I get what she's saying. There's no way Hader's not going to have a kid, with anybody. And I was like, Hader's like, I'm not having a kid. I'm going to adopt one of these orphans. What are you talking about? He's like, I'm with Ison. What are you talking about? I thought that was hilarious. And then she's like, yeah, I like when Stark tries to grab Fern and keep her from falling off the roof. That was really cute. And she's like, I'll pass. I've already had someone else praise me. And Kraft's like, oh, a stone cold woman. You've got some good friends, Frieren. And that's when he says you should cherish them. And oh my God, that's when she's like, well, actually, he's already. I like that Hader's ghost and Ison are in the background being like, we're your friends too, bitch. You should cherish us too. But, we all know she means them too. And then she stares down at the symbol. Now, the symbol that he gives her of the goddess with like the sword and the wings is kind of like the symbol that was on Himmel's cloak as well. So she's like, well, he's already passed. And she's like, I kind of missed my shot to cherish him. But she's like, she's like, he's in heaven now. And he's like, well, then you'll see him again someday. And she's like, you're right. That's what I'm going to go do now. So then he's on his way. He's like, take care, old man. I had fun. And then he just waves goodbye to them. I want Kraft to come back. I want Kraft to be in the story more. Damn it. I really liked his character a lot. And I'm sad that he came for just that one episode and now he's gone. It's not fair, damn it. It's not fair. So yeah, This was an amazing episode, and I loved it. I love Kraft. I want so much more of him. I will not be sad if he shows up again randomly. Won't be sad at all. So we'll just see. We'll see if we meet anybody that knows more about Kraft or has encountered him as well. We'll see if that happens. So I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. But I hope you enjoyed this reaction discussion. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll be back next week with more Frieren Beyond Journey's End.